everybody? Welcome. I'm Rob. Thanks again to Tim for my awesome intro song. I appreciate it. I asked my buddy Tim. I work with that guy. He's pretty cool. He hooked it up with that intro song. Hope you guys are all enjoying it. Everyone that's downloading. Guys, I'm over 100 downloads. Like, how cool is that? Over 4 episodes. It's pretty freaking awesome. Thank you for all the support you guys are giving me. So I want to start things off with a huge thank you to whoever donated to the Back Row Steelers show. That's super cool. It was probably like a $5 donation, which is awesome. By the time it was all said and done and everybody takes a little cut here and there, I got $4 out of it. But hey, $4 is $4. That's pretty amazing. Thank you so much. It actually helped me buy a new microphone. I am using the money for things for the podcast. So if you guys... anybody else wants to donate, that'd be super cool. I did just buy a new microphone. Hopefully it sounds a little better than my old one. To me, it sounds better. I'm hoping it sounds better to you as well. All right. And don't forget to rate and review us. Give us 5 stars. That helps. It always helps. It helps us get up the charts on iTunes. I am available on Podbean, Stitcher, Apple, Spotify, all those things. Go ahead and hit subscribe, and that'll get you new episodes every time they drop. It's going to download it for you and give you a notification, let you know that we're ready to go. Got some new content for you. So thanks for all your support out there. I appreciate all the downloads and all you guys listening, and I hope everyone's enjoying it. I did a recording the other night with Bob Miller of the Back Row Ravens show. I know. I got on and I did a podcast with a Ravens fan. The funny thing about this Ravens fan is he's in Tennessee, and he's kind of adopted a little Tennessee accent, so it's pretty entertaining to talk to him and hear him talk about the Ravens and sound all country about it. We had a really good time, though, and thank you so much for having me on that podcast. Well, we talked a little bit about it, and the podcast wasn't for the Back Row Ravens show. It's for another podcast that he does called the PPR Podcast. You guys should go check that out. It's currently only on Spotify. We're working on getting the distribution right. He is the host of the PPR podcast, and after we had a long conversation the day before recording and during recording, and then we had to re-record a couple portions because of some audio hiccups, we decided, he asked me, he's like, hey, would you mind being a co-host on my show? So I am going to co-host the PPR podcast with Bob Miller. Now, during the podcast that we did do, it was for the AFC North. We kind of did like a fantasy football relevance type piece and how we see the season going for all the AFC North teams. And I figured that's pretty pertinent to Pittsburgh. So, hey man, can I use this and go ahead and pump it out on the Back Row Steelers show too? And he said, yeah, sure, that's fine. So he sent me a copy of the recording, and I'm going to play that for you. Basically, you're going to hear what we talked about on the PPR podcast. It's great content. You guys should all check it out. We had a lot of fun recording. Guys, on that show, we had Matt Bruning, who is of the Back Row Brown show. And then Tommy was Bob's friend. He covered the Bengals. And obviously, Bob being a Ravens fan, he talked about the Ravens. And we kind of did some interaction with most of the teams. And my neighbor Joe, he's a huge Steelers fan. He jumped on here and was sitting here with me as we did some Steelers analytics. So without further ado, I'm going to just go ahead and cut in the podcast here for the PPR podcast for your listening pleasure. So hopefully you guys enjoy this in your ear holes. Thanks a lot, and enjoy the show.
To the PPR podcast. I'm your host, Bob Miller. Welcome back to the show. In today's episode, we're going to cover the AFC North and what you can expect as far as the fantasy production for all the top stars like Lamar Jackson and Joe Mixon and Joe Burrow and Juju Smith-Schuster. We're going to cover all that in today's episode. So to start off, I want to welcome our guest today from the Back Row network of podcasts. First up, we have Rob Sprout from the Back Row Steelers show, and accompanying him is Joe Shaber. They are going to be talking about the Steelers to start things off with, and then we're going to have Matt Bruning talking about the Browns. He is from the Back Row Brown show from the Back Row Network as well. And then we've got Tommy Harvey, who's going to be covering the Cincinnati Bengals. and let you know what to expect from them this year. And then I will be talking about the Baltimore Ravens and what you can expect fantasy-wise from the Ravens. So without further ado, let's get started. Rob, welcome to the show. We appreciate having you on here. Tell the folks out there a little bit about yourself and your podcast, the Back Row Steelers Show.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Rob. I got my buddy Joe here with me, big Steelers fan. So, yeah, like he said, I run the Back Row Steelers Show, and we're about 4 episodes deep in that right now. Super excited to be a part of the Back Row little family of podcast thing we got going on. It's a pretty unique setup. We're working on getting all 32 teams. Pretty excited about that. We all just kind of support each other and bounce off each other. It's a lot of fun. Generally, we talk everything Steelers on that podcast. And if you're interested in following us, we're on Twitter, at Back Row Steelers. Go ahead and hit us up. You got any questions or whatever, feel free to ask, and then I'll answer them on our show.
That's great. I've listened to the show quite a bit, even though I'm a Ravens fan. Forgive me for that, but I've listened to your show. It's fantastic, and that's the reason why we have you on today. So let's get started here. A lot of folks out there are kind of curious of what to expect as far as fantasy production with the Pittsburgh Steelers. How is Big Ben going to do this year? How are they going to be in a running back committee with Connor and Benny Snell? What's your thoughts on these wide receivers and so on? So let's get started. What's your thoughts on Ben Roethlisberger this year? How much longer do you see him playing, and is he going to be fantasy relevant? I mean, every year that he plays, he's a QB1. Do you see that continuing on in the future?
I think as long as he's healthy. Joe took some notes down on this. I'm going to let him talk, and then I'll come back in and talk a little bit about it too.
Well, as far as Ben goes, I remember reading an article about him. He said it was going to be 3 years. He's given him 3 more years for sure. That was a year or so ago, but that was before his injury, of course. And I think he's looking good. He said he's ready to come back, and they feel that he's going to be better than ever. He did the last 2018. He finished and led the league in passing yards, and had 34 touchdown passes as well. So I think he's going to be okay. It's just a matter of how his arm feels and whether he can throw. But I feel good about him. So.
Right, and to follow on with that, I think Ben's going to wind up playing longer than he says he is. As long as his arm holds up after the surgery, and everything's dependent on that. And now everybody can speculate, with the surgery, what's the time of recovery? And he's saying that he's healthy and he's ready to go and ready to play football. I don't think it's very advantageous for Pittsburgh to push the issue. Maybe let him take a little bit of a breather during preseason and stuff. Get out there, maybe play the typical, I'm going to play the first series, throw the ball a couple times, a lot of handoffs, get him back in the groove of playing football, because he has been out of it for a while. But I honestly think QB1 in fantasy, that's very doable given our receiver core and our pass catching abilities at running back, and especially with the new tight ends.
Yeah, I tend to agree. In 2018 when he was healthy, he threw over 5,000 yards, and he was most certainly a top end fantasy quarterback. So as long as his arm is feeling good and holds up, I don't see there being any reason why he's not a stud again this year. And the great thing about it is I think in these snake drafts and whatnot, you're going to be able to get him at a pretty good discount, especially even if you're in an auction draft, you're going to be able to get this guy at a hell of a discount, and I think it's going to really pay off. I hate to say it because I don't want. Sometimes I want to root against him, but listen, the guy's solid as a rock, and he puts up numbers every single season.
Yeah, I think that with the auction drafts, like you said, getting him a little cheaper, everybody's gonna be scared of him. So we can talk dynasty or redraft. I think he's safe, a little more safe in redraft. In dynasty, try to get him a little later. In redraft, if you're going for win now, which obviously it's redraft, and that's what you're doing, right?
It's
So
a solid choice.
he's a solid choice, absolutely. And I think he's going to be up there in the QB1 talk.
Well, he's certainly got a lot of weapons as far as wide receiver goes, but we'll get into that here in just in a minute or two. I wanted to kind of get your opinion on the running back situation. James Conner puts up points when he's on the field, but that's when he's on the field. And there's some rumblings out there saying that Benny Snell is going to get a lot more touches this year. What's your thoughts on the whole running back situation there in Pittsburgh?
Well, here's the deal. There's a ton of James Conner hate. And everyone hates on him because he seems to be hurt a lot. Now, he's coming off of a pretty bad injury. He's coming back in. But the dude runs hard, plays hard, and that's kind of why he gets hurt. He's kind of like welcoming to the tackles and getting hit, and he just wants to power through people. He lacks a little bit of the finesse that you saw from, say, Le'Veon Bell when we had him. So James Conner, he's a really hard runner, doesn't have quite the patience and finesse. So because of that, he's a little more prone to getting hurt. I wouldn't call him injury prone, but prone to getting hurt because of his style. Now, the Benny Snell thing, honestly, I feel like it's still going to be a split with him in the backfield and Jalen Samuels. They're both able to catch the ball. And we just drafted Anthony McFarland. Who,
Yeah.
like, if I'm being 100% honest and watching the film, he looks like Alvin Kamara light. Now, if he gets coached up a little bit, like he was in Maryland, which is like they play a lot of Big Ten schools, and he was very successful at Maryland against tough defenses. So Anthony McFarland, even though we drafted him a little bit later, I think 4th round. Let me see here. Yeah, 4th round. There's a chance that he's going to come in and even take snaps away from Jalen Samuels and Benny Snell.
Well, they did spend a 4th round pick on him, and he was definitely a productive player at Maryland. Some fantasy or NFL analysts out there seem to kind of see him as like a 3rd down back, that he doesn't have the tools, the strength and whatnot to be an every down back, that he would more project as like a 3rd down back. So
they say that, but the kid's 208 pounds, and he's 5'8". That's a low center of gravity, and he's able to push some people. A lot of the highlights just show him catching the ball or running out to the wide sides and trying to get down the field that way. And the highlights don't really show him forcing his way through 4 yards. And he does it with quite a bit of authority. He's got really strong lower leg strength. Ran a 4.40. And he looks faster than that on film. You just watch him run away from people.
Hey, listen, he looks great. I mean, the guy looks great. I watched a lot of Maryland games. He's a heck of a ball player, and I wish him the best of luck. I hope he does well in Pittsburgh. And I think he can be. I think he does have the tools to be kind of a sneaky little fantasy pick, more so in a dynasty league. I don't know how much he's going to produce year number 1, but somebody that if you have the ability to stash a few players, he's certainly a guy that I would stash, and I wouldn't get frustrated with him. I'd hold on to him because I think it may pay off next year. You know, what do you think about Conner this year? Do you think they keep going with, keep riding that hot hand, or do you think Benny Snell's really going to dip in, or Jalen Samuels?
Yeah, I think Connor's kind of the hot hand here, and he's the go-to guy. I don't think Pittsburgh has any intention of taking too much away from him. Joe, you want to talk about some stats quick? You were looking at it here.
It looks like, Connor had, for one, pretty much 251 yards last year. 34.
That's in receiving, though.
In receiving yards, correct. Running yards was 464 yards, and that was 116 attempts. So he's getting average 20.
Listen, in PPR leagues,
in
PPR leagues last year, I mean, Connor averaged about 14.5 fantasy points per game.
Right.
So, that's definitely kind of back-end RB1 numbers, high-end RB2 numbers. So do you see him kind of keeping that up?
I kind of do, and I think you're going to see Jalen Samuels out there more than you're going to see Benny Snell or even Anthony McFarland probably this year. I'd say PPR wise, Jalen Samuels might be the guy to get. He had 57 targets last year.
Yeah, he got a lot of
Like,
action.
no, yeah, it's kind of like quietly, 57 targets. He only had 66 carries, and some of that was because Benny Snell came in there because he's a little bit better runner than he is a pass catcher. So if anything's going to happen, James Conner's going to walk next year, and you're going to see a full committee in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, you could
But
definitely
this year,
see that.
I'd be comfortable with Jalen Samuels as maybe a middle of the road RB2.
Oh wow, wow. Well, if I was a Connor owner, I think I would certainly do what it took to have Jalen Samuels on my team, just to be safe. To kind of have that handcuff, just in case. So, what's your thoughts on the wide receiver core there? There's been a lot. Yeah, listen, Juju was a huge bust last year when everyone had him ranked in the top 5 and expected so much, and I was one of them. I had a lot of shares of Juju last year, but obviously it has a lot to do with Roethlisberger's injury. But now they're talking about not picking up his option, letting him walk after this year. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Is it, if he doesn't step up this year, is there someone else in that wide receiver core that you see kind of taking a huge leap forward and being a fantasy stud? Because there's always just a fantasy rock star in that wide receiver core in Pittsburgh. Is it Juju this year? If not, who do you think it could be?
I mean, I think Juju had a rough year last year, obviously, and that's, I think, like you said, mostly due to Big Ben being down and just not having the throwing capacity that they've had with Ben. But his hands are still there. He seems to keep moving the ball after catch, and I mean, I don't know why he wouldn't do any better this year with Ben back. They seem to have a good connection in the years past, so I think Juju is still a viable player.
I tend to agree. I mean, I think that I think Juju may have a little chip on his shoulder, to be honest. And I think that Ben's going to kind of, I think he's going to force the ball to him. I think Ben's going to want to get him the ball to kind of shut people up and show what they have in him, and maybe they can work out something long term. So if we think Juju's going to come back, I mean, what other wide receivers do you like in that offense?
So I kind of have an interesting take on this whole thing. With the wide receivers, like aside from Joe's over here talking about Juju and being back and being same old Juju, and while I don't disagree with that, and he's going to command more targets than the rest of the wide receiving core, I don't think he's a wide receiver 1 this year. Okay. And I say that even with Ben back because of the amount of weapons that Pittsburgh has, and with Chase Claypool coming in,
he looks pretty good.
Come on, this guy's 6'4", right? Let's see here, 6'4", 238 pounds, ran a 4.42 40. No one's done that since Calvin Johnston.
Yeah, he's a physical freak. That's there's no doubt about that. And a lot of people are taking them in their rookie drafts. So some folks have some high expectations for him down the road. I mean, do you see anyone else kind of stepping up? Deontay Johnson, anyone else?
Deontay Johnson was forced to step up last year, and I think he faced a very steep learning curve with Juju even being injured a little bit. Ben coming out. Deontay, obviously he established rapport with all the quarterbacks because he was getting fed from everybody. Like, he has the talent. So we have Deontay, and then we have Washington. Chase Claypool, who's being compared by a lot of people that I've been reading about as Martavis Bryant, like very similar playing style. But I honestly think that Claypool tracks the ball better than Martavis, and that's saying something. Like, watching the tape, the guy just knows where he's supposed to be, knows how to get the ball. And I think target-wise, you're looking at all 3 receivers needing a significant target share, and
and don't forget about
struggle to cover all of them. And then you have the pass catching running backs being Jalen Samuels and now Anthony McFarland coming in, so they're going to need targets.
And James
then
Washington's still there.
And James Washington, and a lot of people are forgetting even this. Like Pittsburgh has Deion Kane, and while he didn't pan out in Indianapolis, like he is talking a big game. So we'll see how training camp and preseason goes for him. But we got Deion Kane too. He's a previous high draft pick.
So what you're saying is that you would, what would you draft Juju as? Would you draft him as a wide receiver too, or are you maybe looking at him more of as like a flex play in PPR leagues?
If I'm drafting him, I guess we'll talk snake draft. There's been a lot of grumblings about him going late second through the third.
Well, that's certainly a wide receiver 2 position to draft. I mean, would you feel comfortable with Juju Smith-Schuster as your wide receiver 2 in a PPR league?
This year, with a proven Ben being healthy, yes.
All right, well, there you go.
I would take that. Well, and we can kind of segue into our tight end situation here.
Yeah, go right ahead, because I'm really curious to get your thoughts on Eric Ebron this year. What's your fantasy expectations for him? Is he going to be a tight end 1, or is Vance McDonald still going to have a say in that?
No, I think they're just end zone monsters. That's what it's going to wind up being. If our receivers are going to get points, it's going to be between the 20s, and then you're going to see red zone going to the tight ends. I have a really strong feeling you're going to see 2 tight end sets come in whenever we get in red zone, and you're going to see Vance and Ebron out there, and how do you cover them? They're just going to be giants down the middle and be able to get anything that's just thrown up in the air by Ben. They both have good hands. Vance McDonald has the nastiest stiff arm in the NFL.
Yeah, he is a monster out there when
he's healthy.
Yeah,
when
you definitely don't want to have to tackle that guy. I've seen that too many times. But yeah,
Ebron seems to have fixed his brick hands issue that he had forever ago when he was in Detroit, and he was an end zone monster in Indianapolis, and I think that's the whole reason Pittsburgh picked him up.
Well, I hope so, because I don't know where he's going to go in a couple of months in drafts. I don't know if his stock's going to rise or if it's going to kind of, chill out a little bit. But I certainly wouldn't be opposed to having his as my starting tight end in a fantasy league. So we'll see if he gets any more hype, and if not, then you might be able to get a good deal on him. It might pay off quite a bit for you.
I agree, but I think that we need to temper our expectations here, and it's the same conversation I've had about the wide receivers. We're only going to have so many targets available, and you're looking at, at best, they're probably going to be tight end 2s, and it's just because of the targets that the rest of the team is going to command.
Yep, that's a good point. So let me get your thoughts. There's not really many podcasts that are going to talk about defenses very much, so we won't take too much time here. But I thought bringing up Pittsburgh's defense would certainly be something to talk about, because they are an elite fantasy defense, because they create a lot of sacks, and that creates a lot of turnovers. And with Minkah Fitzpatrick there, T.J. Watt being a legitimate, just bona fide stud, what do you expect from their defense? And, would you take them a little early in a fantasy draft?
Yeah, if we're talking like a defense special teams type fantasy setup, for sure, I'm taking Pittsburgh as one of the top 3 defenses this year. Like you said, you brought up Minkah Fitzpatrick. Devin Bush was drafted last year. That guy's an animal. He's going to take a full-on role this year, and they're just going to be rock and roll. T.J. Watt's going to be in there just bullying quarterbacks all over the place. And Vince Williams and Devin Bush, there was an article about them talking about, look, if we got to take all the reps at linebacker, that's what we're going to do, because let's face it, T.J. Watt really plays like a D-end sort of role. He's listed as a linebacker, but he doesn't really play that.
Yeah, I play in a few IDP leagues, and gosh almighty, if he was a defensive end, oh my gosh, he would be something else. But listen, in an IDP league, he's an elite linebacker. So
Oh, yeah.
He's certainly someone to have. So, yeah, I would agree. That defense is top-notch and a top-3 defense, in my opinion. Certainly worth taking maybe a little earlier in a snake draft than some folks would. And I would probably drop a couple of extra dollars on them in an auction draft because I think it's going to pay off big time. So, wrapping things up with the Steelers real quick, I wanted to get your thoughts on their draft. Are there any draft picks that really stood out to you that you think is going to really contribute and could even help out fantasy-wise? We kind of talked about Claypool a little bit. Is there anyone else that kind of sticks out to you?
Yeah, I think Joe wanted to talk a little bit here about his boy from Nebraska. Joe's a Nebraska fan. He's all bent on Carlos Davis.
There you go.
So, go ahead, bud.
A little excited about him. I mean, it's always exciting when one of my Nebraska guys get drafted, but he's been pretty solid the last year for Nebraska, and he had what was his? Hang on, sorry, I'm pulling up his stats. He had only 4 sacks last year, but I mean,
you're playing against Big Ten,
right?
Like Big Ten offensive lines and stuff. Like this he's a stud, and I honestly think
he's pretty fast. He's pretty strong. He can push people out of the way, and he just bullies through everybody. It's pretty. He's a fun guy to watch, and I think he'll be interesting to see how he fits in with the Steelers defense.
Yeah,
I think he's a good fit.
And I think he was a steal in round 7.
Oh, absolutely.
Like honestly, like he's just falling and falling and falling. The guy's 6'2", 313 pounds, ran a 4.8 240. That's big
quick.
Man moving. And 27 reps on the bench. Like he's a little bit strong. Like guy's got some muscle. But for me from the draft, I think we drafted Alex Highsmith in round 3.
Mm-hmm.
He's a linebacker out of Charlotte.
Yeah, that edge rusher. Yeah.
Oh my goodness, man! This guy's just all motor. Like he's 6'3" and 248 pounds. Ran a 4.7 40. Like you got an edge rusher that runs a 4.7. Like there's no quarterback getting away from him. Like he's just a monster. He just wants to go hit people. It was fun watching like film on him and stuff because I did some analytic type things when I was doing the Back Row Steelers show on him, and I was just stunned at how well he performs, and I don't know that anybody was paying attention to him.
Well, I certainly liked the Anthony McFarland pick, but there was another guy they took out of Maryland in the 6th round, Brooks, the safety. I think that was a heck of a pickup for them. I did watch some Maryland games this year, and that guy's a hell of a ball player, and I think that could end up being maybe the steal of the draft for you guys. So I certainly liked what the Steelers did in the draft with those pickups, and Carlos Davis is kind of a beast. So we'll see how that works out as far as the Steelers go there. Anything else you'd like to say about your Steelers before we move on?
Hopefully we can do better than 8-8 with a healthy team. And we'll see you in the playoffs, Ravens.
That's right.
Yes, we will. We'll see each other on that.
I said that wrong. We'll beat you in the playoffs, Ravens.
Yeah, hopefully not. We'll see what happens on Thanksgiving's going to be a heck of a day for me watching that ball game. So I appreciate you guys getting your input on everything as I hear you cracking a beer there in the background.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to move on to the Cleveland Browns now. Matt from the Back Row Browns Show is going to talk a little bit about them, and it's kind of the same layout, the same kind of questions we had as far as the Steelers go. And we're going to start off with Baker Mayfield here and get our opinion on Baker. Last year, listen, last year he was what Kyler Murray is this year. Everyone's crowning him to be just a league winner. He's the can't miss quarterback right now, and he kind of crapped the bed last year as far as fantasy production. Matt, do you see Baker kind of taking a step forward and becoming possibly a QB1 in fantasy leagues, or what do you expect from him this year? First off, thank you for having me on, Bob. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you being kind to Baker, saying that he had a down year. It was a horrible year. I think we can all be honest about that. But I do see him taking a step forward and going back to being a QB1 like he was his rookie year. I think we all kind of got infatuated as Browns fans and the media in what we saw from them at the end of his rookie year with Freddie Kitchens. They came in and they were averaging, I believe it was 4.2 yards a play, which was right behind the greatest show on turf Rams. So their offense was high flying that had his rookie year. And Freddie came in and clearly was a little bit in over his head, and I think that really kind of affected Baker. They tried to do a little bit too much, tried to be too cute, and I think we all know when you're playing in a division like the AFC North, you cannot get cute with the way that Baltimore and Pittsburgh play defense. They are not the kind of guys that are going to fall for the plays and the trick plays that Freddie Kitchens kept trying to do. So I do think that Baker's going to take a big step forward this year. Having Kevin Stefanski there, who loves to run those two tight end sets, 12 personnel, a lot of play actions, a lot of boot, which if you watched, or nakeds getting outside, if you watched Oklahoma play, that is exactly what not just Baker Mayfield, but the guy you just talked about, Kyler Murray, thrived in that offense with Oklahoma. And so I think bringing in Stefanski and bringing that kind of offense over that we saw Kirk Cousins, who I would say is at best a mediocre quarterback, thrived in with Minnesota last year is going to be a great thing for Baker, and I think that's going to jump him back up to being a top 12 quarterback in fantasy this year.
Wow, it's good stuff there. Yeah, I'm kind of curious of what we can expect from him, and that was great analysis there. I think that you may be able to get him at a discount, and with Odell Beckham, seeming like he's going to be a lot healthier this year, I can't see that hurting Baker's production because obviously, Odell wasn't at 100%, and neither was Jarvis Landry. So with those guys coming back, we'll get into that here in a couple of minutes. But yeah, you certainly see Baker kind of, taking a step back into the QB1 realm, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's easily got a shot to get up there. I had some stats pulled up here. So just looking at last year's, he finished 19 with about 325 points, give or take. Everybody's scoring systems are obviously a little bit different. Tom Brady, who finished 12th, was about 60 points higher than him. And guys that are a little bit higher than him, I think he could easily get past Derek Carr, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Phillip Rivers, Jared Goff, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Kirk Cousins. So if you were to jump all those, it would put him at 13. Tom Brady finished obviously 12th last year. We'll see what happens with him going to Tampa Bay. But again, I think if you were to just kind of compare that offense coming over from Minnesota to Cleveland, which I think at least this probably a biased opinion, I think they have a better set of offense here coming to Cleveland with what Kevin Stefanski's bringing. I would say Odell and Jarvis are comparable, if not a tad bit better than Thielen and Diggs. I think the combination of Chubb and Hunt is better than Dalvin Cook. And then that offensive line is much better than what Minnesota had going there. So I think moving that offense now into Cleveland, he's got better weapons. Kirk Cousins finished as QB 13 last year. I think Baker's got a better skill set. If they really play to him and to his strengths like they keep talking about doing, I think that just means great things for him, and we could see him as a top 12 quarterback.
Nice, nice. So you kind of mentioned Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt there. This is something I'm having a hard time with. Is Nick Chubb? Is he a quarterback? I mean, a quarterback. Is he a running back one right now with Kareem Hunt back in the fold?
I do think so. So I know a lot of people got kind of freaked out about that, myself included, last year with the Kareem Hunt signing. But if you go back and look at what Kareem Hunt did last year, the most carries he got in a game in the second half when he started was 9. And Nick Chubb was still getting his usual workload. Nick Chubb did not. I mean, obviously, you don't want to see a workhorse like him lose, 9 carries to a guy like Kareem Hunt. But the lowest he had, even in that game, I believe it was 16. So he was still getting that. You're going to lose some work in the PPR aspect, obviously, with Kareem Hunt. But Nick Chubb has not ever been a PPR back. He's not a guy who's going to catch a lot of passes out of the backfield. He is a great pure runner, and as we've seen, you can attest to this because it was probably one of the best games that offense put together when they played Baltimore. I believe it was in week 3 or 4 last year. When Chubb gets going and he gets past that line of scrimmage, he is hard to bring down, and he's got a lot more speed than people give him credit for. I think he's still going to be a top. I would put him right up there, close to the top 5, at worst 8 running back next year in fantasy. I think Kareem Hunt obviously will continue to eat into his PPR work, but I don't think that will affect him running wise and touchdowns. I still think they're going to lean on him. Kevin Stefanski does like to run a lot of two running back sets. They did it, I believe, 38.8%, but we still saw what Cook did compared to what Madison did in fantasy. Madison really wasn't relevant outside of the games that Cook sat out. So I still think Chubb is the guy. Hunt will eat into his value a little bit, but Chubb is still a top 12 running back for me in fantasy.
Yeah, I was kind of curious about Chubb and Kareem Hunt this year because when Hunt came back to play in Week 10, he was averaging about 13 points a game in PPR leagues, and Chubb was only averaging about 14 points. So I was wondering if we really could see him as being an RB1 this year, or maybe it's one of those things to hold on to him next year. If Kareem Hunt's not there next year, then really Nick Chubb, if you can pick him up in a trade this year, kind of expect a little bit lower production from him than most do, but I really think it could pay off next year big time. I think he could be an elite RB1, kind of in the top, maybe top 8, top 7 types of running backs there. So let me get your opinion on that wide receiver situation there in Cleveland. I mean, Odell Beckham's coming off of, I don't know if I want to call it injuries, but he's had some core issues and he's had surgery and he's coming back from that. Jarvis Landry with his hip apparently he opted not to get any kind of surgery on that. So talking about Odell first, I mean, what do you expect for him this coming season? Is he still an elite wide receiver? Is he going to be a wide receiver 1 again? What's your thoughts on Odell?
Okay. So for Odell, I am a little bit worried about him. Obviously, he came out earlier, I think it was a week or two ago, and said that he feels fine. He's coming in. He feels the healthiest as he's ever been. He's ready for a huge season this year. And I do think he's going to have that as being the one there with Baker. My biggest fear with them, and I think he needs to show it this year, is that they need to grow that connection and that chemistry. Why Jarvis has succeeded those 2 years in Cleveland is they've had the connection, they've had the chemistry, they've worked together now for 2 off seasons. Jarvis showed up to all the workouts, which Odell did not last year. And I think that's kind of why he leans so heavily on Jarvis. And the one thing Baker does as well, Baker does not force the ball to anybody. He's going to go to the guy that's wide open. And so I don't know if that's going to be Odell on every play. Going back to the Vikings offense where Kevin Stefanski ran the past 2 years, we saw guys like Diggs and Thielen complaining about not throwing the ball enough and not getting theirs in certain games. And I don't know if that will eat into this at all with Odell and Jarvis. They seem to be kind of cool with it last year. Will that change this year is going to be the big question for me. I think if I'm betting with the new receivers that have come in, the guys that stepped up last year, I would say Odell probably for fantasy is going to be more in the range of a high-end wide receiver 2, maybe a low-end wide receiver 1. But I think you're gonna have the touchdowns come back this year for him to finish in that wide receiver 1 category, because I do think that the Browns will lean heavier on the run that they have the past 2 years, and I do think that will affect his and Jarvis's value moving forward.
So do you have any kind of an idea about how many catches you think you would project him to have this year? I mean, kind of shooting from the hip. I mean, what do you come to expect as far as that's concerned?
So catches, that is a good question. I was trying to pull up his stats here really quick because I know they both still ended up finishing with 1,000 yards last year, which is kind of surprising considering how bad I guess you would say that their season was. So he had about 74 catches last year, which is actually more than I expected. So if I had to guess, with a better offense, and I think that they'll be running and everything, I do think he'll probably approach 85 to 90, because I still think he's good enough. And I saw the schedule obviously dropped yesterday. When you're not playing the Steelers and Ravens, they've got there was another team they played a really good defense on. I can't remember, but they've got some weaker opponents. Odell has proven that when he's healthy, he is one of the best wide receivers in the league, and he can get by people easily. We saw a lot of plays last year where he was wide open, and Baker just couldn't get the ball to him. So I still think he's going to go in that 80 to 90 range where he's been pretty much his entire career outside of last year in 2018, where he was also hurt and missed the last 4 games.
Well, heck, he had 74 catches last year, so I mean,
Yeah.
gosh, if he does any better than that, you could be looking at maybe somewhere around 90 catches. And, in my opinion, that would put him right up there with the wide receiver ones again. And if you can get him at a discount in your league, I would certainly jump all over that. I know I traded him in a league not too long ago, and I may end up shooting myself for that. But between you and me, man, I couldn't let myself root for a Browns player, so I
I
apologize.
understand.
But anyways, what do you think about that situation with Jarvis Landry? Is there anything else you want to touch on that as far as his, what do you expect him to come back healthy? Is he going to miss a little time in the beginning? I mean, what's your thoughts there?
So from everything that I've read and heard from Jarvis is that he will be back. Now, obviously, it's kind of weird, right? We don't know what training camps or preseason are going to look like with everything going on in the world. But he has said that he is going to be back and healthy for training camps before all this stuff happens. So I think Jarvis is going to be fine. He's a guy who's always kind of played through injury, anyways. I still think he's probably a high end to middle tier wide receiver too for fantasy, just because of his catches. I mean, again, last year he had 83 catches, and the one thing I'll say for him is I think I could see that going up as well, because you have a healthy Odell Beckham. You've got a guy like Rashard Higgins now who's finally back in the fold, because we really struggled last year with that third wide receiver. We had guys out there like Damian Ratley, and I don't even remember some of the other guys they were throwing out there as a third wide receiver. It just wasn't working for him. You could throw a cornerback of my talent on the guy. Well, I shouldn't say that, but you've got throw in the lower guys on the guys like Damian Ratley and kind of cover them and shift your coverages to Jarvis and Odell. When you have a guy like Odell and Donovan Peoples-Jones and Higgins, who they also drafted this year in DPJ, throwing him on the other side of Odell, and then you move Jarvis into his more natural position in the slot. I think that just makes him 10 times more dangerous. He'll be able to kind of be that target hog right there in the middle of the field, not even mentioning the tight ends that we have on the team and Kareem Hunt coming out of the backfield. I think Jarvis is going to continue to be a target monster. I think he'll be fine and healthy coming into the season. And as I said, he's already got that chemistry with Baker. So even if the offseason program and preseason is limited due to everything going on with COVID-19, those two have that chemistry that I think he's still going to get those catches and end up being a high end to at worst middle tier wide receiver too for fantasy.
I tend to agree there 100% because it seems to me over the last 2 or 3 seasons that Jarvis just hasn't gotten the respect in the fantasy world that he really deserves. He's sneaky and he's sneaky good, and he puts up points when he's on the field, and I think he's always underdrafted. So I think he's a great pickup as well this year. And you kind of spoke about the tight ends a second ago. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, listen, everyone's been waiting for David Njoku to be this stud, and man, you're going to grow old and die before that's going to happen. So, they've signed Austin Hooper, and he was just a superstar last year in the fantasy world. What's your thoughts on Hooper this year? And man, can you cut bait on David Njoku now? Can we just drop this guy already?
So I don't think you can cut Njoku yet. I admit that he is definitely not panned out to what a lot of us had hoped when the Browns traded up for him in the first round a couple years, 4 years ago now, and took him. He's a physical freak, and he struggled early on in his career with the drops. He just did not have very sure hands. Was doing a lot better with that last year until, unfortunately, Baker kind of threw the ball way too high. He got that undercut, fell, broke his arm, and we never really saw him recover after that. Why I would say not to cut bait on Njoku is, again, Kevin Stefanski, as I mentioned earlier, they love to run those two tight end sets. They ran it, 38.8% of the, no, I'm sorry, 61.6% of the time with 3 wide receivers, 2 tight ends, and a running back in the backfield. He likes to have that tight end that can do everything and most importantly block, especially in the run game. And I think that's Hooper. David Njoku could not block anybody. And then that's okay. They don't expect that of him, but that's what Hooper does. I would not be surprised if Njoku ends up becoming more of the offensive tight end than Austin Hooper, which I don't think a lot of people were thinking when we saw Hooper sign that, the most expensive tight end contract here this offseason. And Joke is going to be that guy who can play on the other side of the formation, kind of cut up and going in routes and be in the middle of the field for that big target. And if he can prove he can catch the ball, I still think he's going to have a lot of fantasy value. I don't think Cooper will be affected that much by it, but I don't see him being the tight end one like he was most of last season before he got hurt. I think he's going to drop back down into that 6 to 10 range that he had been the past couple seasons, just because they're not. I think he's going to be at best the third, fourth, or fifth option in the offense at times with that, because it's going to be Odell, Landry, Hunt, and or Chubb. You've also got Njoku, Higgins on certain routes. So I don't think Cooper's going to always be the main target. And they do love to run the ball when they get down into the red zone. So I don't know if that's going to help Hooper with the touchdown, where we kind of saw that really spike up last year with Atlanta. So I think Cooper takes a little bit of a hit. And the one other thing I will say on Njoku and to hold him is that there's still a lot of teams, I think, that are very interested in him. We saw a lot of talk that Washington was trying to trade for him with the Trent Williams talk before he went to San Francisco. With them drafting a guy like Harrison Bryant, who is also a phenomenal offensive tight end and also a very good run blocker, if he starts to progress a little bit, I wouldn't be surprised if they trade Njoku somewhere. And if he goes to a place like, for instance, Washington, that doesn't have themselves a solid tight end, he could really produce for a team that doesn't have a tight end and be a tight end one, as we all know in the fantasy game, tight end landscape outside of those top 3-4 guys is pretty bad. So if Njoku goes to a place that he could be a starter, I think that he could be a stud still. So I wouldn't cut bait on him just because of what the Browns have done. I think he'll have a little bit of fantasy value this year, and especially if he gets traded, his value will skyrocket.
Nice. Good stuff there. So, okay, well, you've convinced me to hang on to him a little bit longer. So, let's talk about the draft real quick. I don't want to beat a dead horse because there's a million podcasts out there that are talking about draft results and giving you 30-minute breakdown on each player that the team has taken or anything. But let me get your thoughts on the Browns draft and what really sticks out to you. And is there anybody in there that you think could be nice to have in fantasy down the road?
Yeah, so I love their draft. I wasn't as high on Jedrick Wills when they drafted him in the first round, but the more I've read and watched and Joe Thomas talk about him, I think that's going to be great for Nick Chubb. And so if you're a Nick Chubb owner or a Baker owner, really, because I think he solidifies that offensive line. I'll go the IDP route here, since we are kind of the part of the Back Row Network, and that's what they're famous for, the great job they do with the IDP stuff. Jacob Phillips, the guy they drafted in the third round out of LSU, is a great run stopper. It's something that the Browns have struggled. Again, you guys know, being the AFC North, it's a staple of good defense and good run games. The Baltimore Ravens, broke my heart in drafting J.K. Dobbins, and so now I've got to watch him compete against us twice a year. Not an easy guy to stop. He's an absolute stud, but getting a guy like Jacob Phillips in the middle of that defense, who's a great run stopper, is going to help. So I think you can rack up a lot of tackles with a guy like that. Harrison Bryant, as I just mentioned, I think could be a future tight end stud for them, because I saw him, just blow up Ohio State a couple years ago when they played Florida Atlantic. He's an offensive stud. I think he's got a chance to be really good. And then my sleeper would be Donovan Peoples-Jones. I mentioned him just a minute ago. Really good kid. Played for the team up north, had a really bad quarterback throwing him the ball. He's got all the measurables, all the skills, all the athleticism. There's a lot of talk in Cleveland that they may move on from Odell or Jarvis in a year or so, because both of them will be making over $14 million, and not a lot of teams you see paying wide receivers that much. One wide receiver, much less two. Jarvis, they can get out of his contract next year for, I believe it's a little less than a $2 million cap hit. And Odell will be a free agent in a couple of years. They only signed Rashard Higgins to a 1-year deal. So I think Donovan Peoples-Jones comes in this year. I don't think he'll do much being a rookie. And again, the shortened offseason and everything, new offense, new team. I don't know if he'll make an impact this year, but Donovan Peoples-Jones is a guy that I could see easily being a wide receiver too for fantasy purposes moving forward after this season in an explosive offense like the Browns project to have, and possible losing those guys as well, or losing one of either Odell or Jarvis in the future.
Man, that's great stuff. I appreciate your coverage there on the Browns. You've done a great job. I love your podcast quite a bit. I want everyone to give you a follow at Back Row Browns, at Back Row Browns on Twitter. Great stuff from Matt, as always. I look forward to having you on the show again in the future. So thank you very, very much for your stuff there. I mean, that really shed some light on some questions, honestly, that I kind of had about the Browns. You know, I was curious about Odell. I was curious about Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and what in the world to expect from Baker this year. So that certainly helps out me. And if that helps me out, then I imagine that's going to help out a lot of folks out there that are curious with those same questions. So again, Matt, thank you, and everyone give him a follow at Back Row Browns. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the Baltimore Ravens, a team that I'm very familiar with. And I've gotten a lot of questions on Twitter and online as far as what kind of production we can expect out of Lamar Jackson this year. Is he going to maintain that production that he did last year? You know, is Mark Ingram going to be a running back one again this year? And what kind of spike in the production of Hollywood Brown can we expect this year? So I'm going to start off with Lamar Jackson. Last year he had a historic season. He passed for 3,127 yards and 36 touchdowns and only 6 picks, but he rushed for 1,206 yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. And that by far was the QB1 numbers last year. So a lot of folks are wondering what kind of numbers we can expect from him this year. Is he going to be the number one quarterback in fantasy production again this year? And I say yes, personally. I think he throws for a little bit more yardage. I don't see him throwing 36 touchdowns. I've got him penciled in for 31 touchdowns and 9 picks as opposed to his 6 interceptions last year. But the big debate out there is rushing yards. He rushed for, like I said, 1,206 yards last year. Is he going to rush for over 1,000 yards this year? Because that is what separates him from the pack by far. So Rob, I've got him penciled in right now for about 1,086 yards. What's your opinion on his rushing production this year? Do you think he takes a step back there? And how much is that going to hamper his production?
I think he's going to take a fairly larger step back than you're even predicting. I'd honestly be surprised if he rushes for more than 800 yards with J.K. Dobbins there and stuff, and we're going to talk about him in a little bit, but J.K. Dobbins is great, and he just never had an opportunity. He's always hit behind the line, so hopefully he gets an opportunity to get out there and move around, but Lamar's going to take a little bit more of a step back for the running. I think they're going to be more interested now that they see what he's got and preserving him and making sure he can continue to be a quarterback. If you're out there running around, you're more likely to get hurt, and I think Baltimore's going to try to save him a little bit from that.
Yeah, I watched a lot of ball games, and I cringed quite a few times when I saw him take off. And I will say this, he did one hell of a job avoiding those hits. He ran out of bounds a lot. He would slide, but he did take a few hits last year, and you never want to see that. So I'm kind of with everyone else when I kind of cringe when I see him take off at times. So if you've got him, if you see him running for right around 800 yards, as far as his other production, I mean, do you see him still being the quarterback one, the first quarterback you should take off the board this year? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I think I would still take him as my QB1. I mean, him and Mahomes are right neck and neck with each other, but you're looking at Lamar Jackson. I said he's going to regress in some rushing yards, but I think he's going to rush for more touchdowns. And that's just because, if you're saying, hey, we're not going to run him as much, and you prove it in the game, they're going to expect him to pass more when it gets into the red zone. And I have a feeling you're going to see him rush for probably 10 or 11 touchdowns instead of 7 this year.
Okay. Hey, I'm on board with that. I'm sure any Lamar Jackson owner out there will definitely appreciate that. So let me get your opinion on this. If you had a startup dynasty league, or you're just in a dynasty league whatsoever, what's your thoughts? Who would be your number one quarterback in dynasty out there? Because I know a lot of folks are in between him and Mahomes right now. What's your thoughts on that?
I'd be happy with either. I feel like for overall production and everything, they're going to be about the same for a long as they can both stay healthy. So I'd be good with either. And honestly, if it was my turn to draft and I had my choice of Lamar or Mahomes, I'd be asking a whole lot of questions to a whole lot of people trying to figure out and make my mind up for me. That's a difficult spot to be in.
Well, that's kind of my thoughts. I want to say that, Lamar's going to pass for less yards, obviously, than what Mahomes will. But those rushing yards, man, that's just that's the cherry on top when it comes to Lamar. And as far as fantasy production, I mean, like I said, you can't go wrong with either one. But there is so much debate out there, in the fantasy world of which quarterback you should take first. Me, maybe just call me a homer. I probably would lean a little bit more Lamar just because of the rushing yards. And just like what you said a moment ago, the rushing touchdowns. And, there's still some leagues out there that score passing touchdowns as 4 points. And rushing touchdowns obviously are 6. And that's a huge, huge advantage if you're in that type of league. But if you're in a league that just does 6-point touchdowns all across the board, I still have him up there because of those rushing totals. Tommy, do you have any opinions as far as who you would take, in a dynasty league when it comes to Mahomes? Or I know we've talked about it in the past. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Me personally, I would probably take Patrick Mahomes. Just the style of play Lamar Jackson has lends himself to injury. With that, I would take Mahomes. And Jackson finished number 1 last year, but keep in mind Mahomes also missed a couple games with that knee injury he had.
Yeah, it's true.
I would still take Patrick Mahomes. I love Lamar Jackson. I think he's most definitely number 2 on my list, but I would take Mahomes first.
See, there you go, and the debate continues. So, moving on, let's talk a little bit about Mark Ingram. Last year, he put up some great numbers. He rushed for 10 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards. He caught 26 passes for 247 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns. I don't see that happening again this year. I mean, he was the RB9 last year in PPR leagues, and I don't see that being the case this year. I see him being more of probably a low-end RB2 instead of a low-end RB1. I don't have him rushing for 1,000 yards this year, and I might be a little bit generous when I have him kind of slated in for about 914 yards, but I still have him rushing for 10 touchdowns, which will hold some value there. I don't know what kind of catching receptions he's going to have. I think that probably drops a little bit with the emergence of Justice Hill. I believe he takes over that third down role, and he'll get a spike in production as far as his receptions. Rob, what's your opinions on Mark Ingram this year? I mean, what do you think there?
I think we're going to see a larger regression than even you're predicting. And I know I keep shooting down all the Ravens, and a lot of that has to do with the defenses they're going to be playing and people being onto their style of play now. So last year it worked out very, very well for them. So this year I think people are going to be just a little more onto it. And with Ingram, I think you're looking at maybe 600 or 700 yards. And the touchdowns are probably going to regress because J.K. Dobbins has proven that he can break tackles. Not that Ingram hasn't, but Ingram's getting a little older, and I think they're going to want to see what they have in Dobbins.
I tend to agree there because that's what a lot of folks are wondering is what to expect from J.K. Dobbins this year. I fully expect the Ravens to cut ties with Mark Ingram after this year. They can save $5 million against the cap next year. And in the NFL,
Gus Edwards walks too.
Yeah. Gus is he's a restricted free agent. He's back with the team this last year, but I could see him being gone next year as well. Really just clearing the path for J.K. Dobbins to really take over that, a 3-down back. I really believe that can be the production we get out of J.K. What's your opinion? I mean, what do you think about J.K. Dobbins with that? I know some folks wanted to see him in Pittsburgh, and that's unfortunate that the Ravens got him. But what's your opinion on Dobbins?
I think he's a great runner. Definitely going to be able to step up and take a 3-down back sort of role. However, you're still going to have Justice Hill there. I'm not a big fan of forcing running backs in there for all 3 downs if you don't need to. For fantasy purposes, obviously, I want the 3-down back, period. I want the guy that can do everything. But I don't think that's going to happen, especially like this season. You're going to see it progress probably more toward J.K. Dobbins and Justice Hill show, where Dobbins is your first, second down back, and then Justice Hill's coming in to pick up the remaining if he needed on third down.
Yeah, I completely agree there. Tommy, I mean, what's your thoughts on the Mark Ingram, J.K. Dobbins type of? You got any opinions on that?
I think Ingram's dynasty value is very close to zero right now. I mean, he's a 30-year-old running back. They just drafted J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins is obviously going to be the guy moving forward after this upcoming season. I would look at Ingram as more of a, like you said, a low-end RB2 to even a mid-range flex option this upcoming season. You may be looking at, 700, 750 yards rushing, 6 or 7, 8 touchdowns. He may even be one of those guys who can squeeze up to 10 touchdowns because of goal line carries. I just don't see him getting those types of touches anymore.
Let me ask you guys both this, and I'll start with you, Rob. Should you be looking to shop Mark Ingram and hope to sell that to another team of the numbers he put up or the potential numbers he could put up in this offense again this year? Or do you think that his value's taken a huge hit now with the drafting of J.K. Dobbins?
I haven't tried yet. I think it'd be interesting to try to sell him right now. I kind of like the idea of maybe I can get a third for him, maybe a fourth. And before it wasn't that. Now, if you'd have done it before the draft happened, and before they got J.K. Dobbins, you probably could have got a higher draft pick or maybe somebody who is like a third down back on a team somewhere and been able to hopefully not have him retire on your roster. But it might be to the point now where that's what's going to happen.
I got you. What do you think there, Tommy? What's your thoughts? I mean, would you be trying to shop him, or would you just want to kind of hold tight because of maybe his value's taking a hit?
I would definitely try to shop him. I would see what type of value you'd be able to get out of him. Matter of fact, if you have him and you don't have Dobbins, I would either be trying to get Dobbins or trade away Ingram. There's no value in Ingram outside of having Dobbins, in my opinion.
All right. Well, there you go.
That's kind of a good point. You may be able to sell him for more if you sell him to the Dobbins owner.
Yeah. It's kind of like a reverse handcuff there.
Right.
In a way. So, yeah, that's a good point. I tend to think that as well. If you're in a win now mode and you could use that depth on your fantasy team, I'd say hold on to Ingram because of the touchdown potential there. But if you've got nothing to gain, I would certainly try to move him now before he gets cut next year and he ends up maybe back in New Orleans or something like that. I would try to get what you could out of him now if that's the situation you're in. So let's move on to the wide receivers here. This is something, Rob, you and I have talked about quite a bit. Last year, Hollywood Brown kind of exploded on the scene to start the year off. He finished the year with 46 catches, 584 yards, and 7 touchdowns. Last year he was hurt. He had a Liz Frank injury. He went on yesterday and then last week and said he could barely walk at times last year. Yet he still played, and he looks to be ready at 100% this year. I've watched a lot of videos on him working out this offseason, and I'm extremely excited to see what kind of production we can expect out of him. In my early predictions, I have him penciled in at 68 catches, 887 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Let me get your thoughts on Hollywood before we move on to any other receivers. What's your thoughts on him?
I think you're spot on with the production prediction there. Maybe even a little more yardage on that, even the same amount of catches. Would you say 68? So
I had 68 catches and 887 yards with 9 TDs.
Right. I think you're going to see him over 1,000 yards with probably around the same amount of catches. And the reason for that is he just stretches the field. And if Lamar Jackson he already trusted him enough, and he proved it during the season, he's just going to huck the ball down the field to him. And his yards per reception is just ridiculous. So you're going to see him just opening up the coverage down the field and just being able to burn people. And I think a lot of the league's leaning toward that. They're trying to find the burners to get out there and just stretch the field out.
Yeah, I tend to agree, and me following the Ravens as closely as I do, he has an obvious chemistry with Lamar Jackson. They're pretty tight friends, best buds in a lot of opinions there. So I see that chemistry could carry on to the field, where I can see Lamar really wanting to see Hollywood succeed. And I personally think I think he'd be a nice wide receiver too next year. And if you can, pick him up in a dynasty league, I think that right now is the lowest his value is ever going to be. So if it's someone that you have a little faith in, I would possibly look at acquiring him, because I think down the road it's going to cost a lot more to get him. And Tommy, do you agree with these numbers and maybe someone you should be kind of shopping for in a fantasy league?
Absolutely. Matter of fact, I think he could have an even better season than that. I would look at him maybe even go close to 1,100 yards this upcoming season. I think this guy is a Pro Bowl caliber potential wide receiver. I think he's outstanding. He's got really good speed. He runs really good routes. Like you said, Lamar Jackson and him have great chemistry. I think the sky's the limit for this guy.
Yeah, I see a lot of Tyreek Hill in him, and I know a lot of people had that comparison. That was the comp last year. Do you have any opinions as far as that's concerned? As far as Rob, would this be a guy you'd look to target to maybe try and pick up in a fantasy league, maybe via trade or something?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go and probably try to get him here in some leagues today. Honestly, as we converse about it and think about it, I'm kind of getting a little more on board with it, and that's been really, really difficult with the Baltimore passing game. There's never been a time where I'm like, I'm gonna go get a Baltimore receiver for my fantasy team.
Yeah, that
Like,
isn't
just
said very often.
right, like ever. So maybe like a tight end, and that's been pretty typical there. But I think I'm going to go out and try to get me some Hollywood Brown and see if I can do it on the cheap.
So let me get your opinion on this, because the Ravens also, in the third round, drafted Devin DuVernay, and in the sixth round, drafted James Prochet. DuVernay, to me, I see a lot of Steve Smith in him. He's a kind of a little stockier build, runs good crisp routes. He's got incredible hands. I believe he could take over that starting role in the slot for the Ravens, next season if the Ravens decide to move on from Willie Snead. And I know you like Devin. Let me get your opinions as far as he's concerned, and maybe where you would look to maybe pick him up in a dynasty league.
So I kind of like Devin DuVernay, and I'd be interested to see how the dynamic is going to work in Baltimore. I just talked about, like, never has there been a time where I'm like, I want to go get a Baltimore receiver. And if the culture shift is happening there, that's a thing, this is the guy to get. Because, like you said, I see Steve Smith in him too. He's tough. He's not afraid to go out there and get hit. He's going to make the play for the ball. And I kind of like him. I wouldn't be surprised if Willie Snead takes a backseat to him. When's your guys' bye week? I don't even remember. But usually around there is when a lot of the shifts happen. So I could see him taking over for the Willie Snead. I've never been a big fan of Willie Snead anyway, and I think he was kind of a waste of time.
Well, I think they needed someone that was a little bit more reliable compared to, like you said, I mean, Baltimore's never really had huge success with the wide receivers unless it was, an established veteran, a la Derek Mason or Anquan Bolden or even Steve Smith. But as far as anyone else, I've not really seen a whole lot of production out of these guys fantasy-wise. And I'm really excited about Devin and seeing what he can bring to the table. Tommy, I know you follow college quite a bit. What's your opinion on DuVernay? What do you see there?
He had a monster season last year at Texas. I think he's right up there as far as guys I would like to have. If you're in a league that has a taxi squad or allows you to stash players, he would definitely be a guy I would look at grabbing. Especially, this was such a monster wide receiver loaded class that you have a ton of these guys out there. And I would say DuVernay is definitely one of those guys I'd be looking at.
Yeah, I think he fell into Baltimore's lap. There was a lot of wide receivers, and like Tommy was saying, piggybacking off of that, I think he would have gone a little bit higher in the draft had there not been such a stacked class this year when it comes to wide receivers. Rob, I know you're a big fan of Prochet. Give me your opinions on him because I like what I've seen. I'll be honest with you. I don't know a whole lot about him. So you tell me what your thoughts are on Prochet.
I think that James Prochet is going to be quite the stud there in Baltimore. I think he's a little better than Devin Duvernay. Duvernay has a little more of the background pedigree type thing you want to see coming out of college. But James Prochet, this guy is going to make every contested catch ever. I don't know have you watched any film on him or anything?
I have. He's got incredible hands.
Oh my goodness, this guy.
After looking at a lot of this, a lot of his footage and going back, golly, how did he fall into the 6th round?
I have no idea. I watched some of the tape on this guy, and he makes crazy plays on the sidelines, and it was almost like he was auditioning his whole college career to be in the NFL. Like you watch 2 feet down, 2 feet down, 2 feet down, and he makes sure of it, especially all the end zone catches. He's making sure he secures the ball. That guy, he's going to be a security blanket for Lamar Jackson. So if Lamar's got to chuck one up there, he knows that's the guy to go to because he's going to go get it.
Yeah, and I'm trying my best not to be a homer here, but looking at the Ravens draft, they absolutely killed it, seeing a lot of those picks that they got later on in the draft, and I'm loving it, and Prochet is just another example of that. So you're thinking that Hollywood's the guy to own wide receiver-wise in that Ravens offense. Is there anyone else that you would we talked about Duvernay. That'd be a nice little stash. And according to you, maybe it'd be nice to stash Prochet if you can, if you've got a deep league.
I've been picking up Prochet, just go get him. I think I drafted him end of the 3rd in one of my leagues. And I know that's super early, but given the class, everyone's taking all the studs. And then you get to that point, you're kind of like, well, I'm just going to go get my guy anyway because I don't know if any of these rest of these players are going to pan out. So I get to the end of the 3rd. If I'm drafting there, I'm going to get him. I try to get James Prochet in every league I'm in, and then I just stash him on my taxi.
Well, that's good stuff. Let's move on to the man, Mark Andrews. Last year, he was a stud. He caught 64 passes, 852 yards, and 10 touchdowns. He was the tight end 4 to finish the year in PPR leagues. This year, I've got him. Listen, they traded Hayden Hurst to Atlanta, and I believe that's going to put Mark Andrews on the field even more. I believe he gets a spike in his production, believe it or not. I don't know if he takes a step back this year. I don't see any negative regression. I've got him in at 75 catches, 914 yards, and I've still got him in there for 10 touchdowns. He right now in a dynasty league, he's my tight end 3, right behind Kittle and Kelsey. Let me get your opinions on Mark Andrews' production and what you can maybe expect to see out of him this year.
I think you're probably spot on. I don't know about the number 3 tight end. I'd probably put him 3 or 4. Honestly, maybe 4. You gotta remember people like Evan Ingram are going to be back this year in New York, and he's going to have Danny Dimes throwing the ball up there. So we'll see what happens. I think that you're going to see a really, really close battle for that 3-4 spot between him and Evan Ingram. I think
Evan Ingram is productive.
Right, and Mark Andrews just needs to get on the field a little bit more. He had a lot of catches and stuff, but I think his snap percentage, if you give me a second here, I'll look it up quick.
Well, he was a little banged up last year. He did play a little hurt, and they kept him out of a lot of those running plays. Just get him off the field, keep him out of those blocking schemes just to, not to cause any more injury to him. But this year I really, really see him having to step up and play more downs to where he's going to have to block. And to be honest with you, it's going to throw those defenses off. Last year when he was in the game, when he would come in, you kind of knew it was going to be a passing play. And this year, if he's blocking, it's going to throw off those linebackers and open things up for him more. Maybe that's just me being a homer, but I see him being even more productive this year. And just like we were talking about Hollywood Brown, I don't know if Mark Andrews'
value is ever going to be get any lower. But if this season he has a couple of bad games or something, and you can go get him a little bit at a discount in a dynasty league, jump all over that.
Yeah, I'm
that's
with you
my
on
personal
that.
opinion there.
So I got the snap percentage, and this is kind of crazy. The game that he had the highest snap percentage was at Seattle, and he was on the field for 58% of the plays. That's it.
58%.
So, and most of them, a majority of the season, he was on the field for less than 50% of the plays, and still managed the production he did. So, if Baltimore gets him out there more, and Hollywood's healthy, stretching the field, and you have two new receivers coming in there, I think Baltimore's passing game is going to be wide open. And Lamar's been working on accuracy. It's going to be interesting. And as a Steelers fan, I'm not really looking forward to playing them this year.
Yeah. Listen, I mean, Mark Andrews was kind of that was Lamar's blanket last year. He looked to him quite a bit. I don't see that changing in any way whatsoever this coming season and moving forward. Tommy, let me get your opinion on Mark Andrews. What's your thoughts as far as what he did last year compared to what he may do this year, and what do you think as far as a dynasty value on that? Is it someone that you would target to try and go get?
Absolutely. Mark Andrews has been a stud since he was in college at Oklahoma. That guy was a monster there. He's a monster now too. He's probably my tight end 3 going into this next season. Like you said, behind Kelsey and Kittle, probably right ahead of somebody like Zach Ertz. Ertz's value is hurt because of Goddard being there also. But Mark Andrews is definitely a stud to have. I would look at him to have probably close to about the same season he had last year, maybe a little bit better. He could reach close to 900 yards.
Right. That would be very, very productive. And listen, if he put up those points, I couldn't see someone like an Evan Ingram surpassing those yards. Ingram has been a little bit banged up, and he's got all the talent in the world, but I just need to see him stay on the field. But Evan Ingram is kind of a sneaky little tight end to maybe go pick up in a dynasty league. But I
keep
think
forgetting about Hunter Henry too.
Well, I don't know what to expect about with Hunter Henry this year. That with a new quarterback there, I don't know. I think Hunter Henry's got all the talent in the world, but he's been a little injury prone, and I don't. What can we expect as far as a rookie quarterback and the touchdown production with Hunter Henry? I mean, you would possibly put him ahead of someone like Andrews or Ingram.
I think he's right there in the same category with them. You're going to see him used as a security blanket because you do have a young quarterback play. Or who's out there as a starter? Tyrod Taylor.
Yeah, but they drafted Herbert. So
yeah, it's a couple games, and Herbert's gonna. If they're not winning, Herbert's gonna play. So anyway, let's get back to the Ravens.
Yeah, buddy, we could talk about any team, anytime. So really, other than that, that's what we can expect as far as the offensive side of the ball with Baltimore. I do want to add something real quick, as you and I kind of talked about a little earlier with the Steelers. The Baltimore Ravens defense is elite. I've got them, San Francisco, and Pittsburgh as my top 3 defenses. And Baltimore has added even more pass rushing this year with the acquisition of Calais Campbell and Derek Wolfe, and they drafted Justin Matabukwe. These guys are going to get after the quarterback even more, cause a lot more turnovers. You're going to see a little bit more in sack production and more interceptions. And I wouldn't have any issue stepping outside your comfort zone and maybe taking the Ravens defense a little earlier than what you are comfortable with, just like the Pittsburgh defense. Other than that, I mean, do you agree with that as far as I'm concerned, Rob? Would you be happy to have the Ravens defense, and would you take them a little early?
Yeah, I think in the very few leagues that I still play a defense in that's not like IDP, I'd be going after the Baltimore defense just as hard as I'd be going after the Steelers defense. I think you're going to look at a lot of sacks, good bit of interceptions. They're going to be quite the producers, and I just feel like the AFC North, we're just kind of chock full of defense at this point. And except for
And listen,
Cincinnati.
Baltimore has right out there right now is they're saying the Ravens have the easiest schedule this year as far as after the schedule release. So listen, that just means good things for Lamar. That means great things for Hollywood, Mark Andrews, and that defense. I do want to say a couple of things about their draft. One of the things that they did get, like I just mentioned with Justin Matabukwe, I think that's going to add to that defense. We've already spoken about Devin DuVernay, but listen, man, that team, speaking of that defense, has added Patrick Queen and Malik Harrison at their inside linebacker position. My gosh, what a steal on both of those guys. That's just going to help that defense. It's going to help their running, them stopping the run. And I believe that this team, this defense, is going to be even better this year than they were last year. So after that, I want to move on to the last team we're going to cover. We're going to cover the Cincinnati Bengals now, and I've got Tommy Harvey here, who is a follower of the Bengals and has his opinions on that. So, Tommy, let me get your opinion on Burrow. Is he a quarterback one this year? Can he be a quarterback one down the road, or do you see a little bit of false hope in him?
I don't think he's a quarterback one this year. I think long term he could be a kind of a back end QB1 type guy. You got to remember he's playing these defenses every week. Baltimore's defense is always really good. Same with Pittsburgh. There's having to play them twice a year is really tough, and Cleveland's defense isn't awful either. So going into this season, not only does he have them, but he also has to play the Colts, who have a solid defense, the Titans, the Chargers, the Cowboys. All those teams have solid defenses. I don't see him being a QB1 this year. I do see him having to throw the ball a lot with them probably being down quite a bit, but that could also equal more turnovers, especially with the defenses that he's going to be playing against.
Yeah, he's a little bit of a cocky guy, so I don't see him being afraid to chuck the ball around. So you might see some turnovers there, but you may see some nice garbage time as far as I'm concerned with Burrow. Rob, let me get your thoughts on this. You and I have had this debate a few times as far as if you are in your dynasty league and you have your rookie draft coming up and it's a super flex league and you've got Clyde Edwards-Helaire out there, Jonathan Taylor out there, Tua, who is your number one pick? You've got the first pick in the draft. There's a lot of folks out there that say take Burrow. Some of them say take Taylor, and a lot of them say take Edwards-Helaire. Who are you taking it? Because I have the number one pick in one of my drafts, and I'm kind of debating this, but to me, it's a no-brainer, and I'm taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I want to get your opinion as far as a super flex league. Who are you taking?
I think it's all going to depend on who I have currently at quarterback at super flex. Now, if I'm sitting there and I have some aging quarterbacks, I'm probably going to just take Burrow. And it's because he is a starting quarterback. Cincinnati's already basically done that because they let Andy Dalton go. So Burrow's our guy, period. And I think that holds a lot of weight. And it's really going to hold a lot of weight in super flex leagues, that you know that this guy is going to be the starter. And there's a lot of hype around the weapons around him, and he does have some good ones, but when you're looking at Clyde Edwards-Helaire, his landing spot with Andy Reid, that's really hard to pass up too. So I understand why you want to do it. Tua, I think, is a better quarterback than Burrow. You just don't know if he's going to still have a hip next year, or pick an injury or he break his foot twice, and I don't know how that's going to play out down there in Miami. So yeah, if you're quarterback needy, you have some aging quarterbacks, definitely take Burrow. He is going to, for that nice safety, startable guy that's going to be sitting on your bench for when your old quarterbacks retire. I'd say go ahead and get him.
Yeah, so, I mean, you and I have kind of talked about this and chuckled in the past about Burrow and in comparing him to, say, Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton has had one fantasy-relevant season, and do you think Tommy, I'm going to ask you this. Do you see Burrow being
something changing there in Cincinnati to make him the possible QB1 to even for the fact that, I mean, to make you even think of taking him over Clyde Edwards-Helaire in a PPR type of Superflex league?
In a Superflex league, if you are in need of a quarterback and if you're picking 1-1, most likely you probably are, just because, let's be honest, if you're picking 1-1, that means you probably had a pretty poor season the previous season. Not the case, not in your case, obviously, but I would still take Clyde Edwards-Helaire just because running backs are so hard to come by. Quarterbacks, you're able to plug guys like Daniel Jones in there in the Superflex league and still be successful. You can't go without good running backs. If you go without good running backs, you're gonna be picking 1-1 again next year. I would steer towards the running back.
Yeah, I tend to agree there, and instead of maybe spending your first overall pick on Burrow, I would, maybe go shop around your league and see if you can get like a Sam Darnold on the cheap, or go pick up like a Kirk Cousins or something like that before maybe I had to make that decision with that number 1 overall pick. I mean, would you agree with that, Rob?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if you're able to shop around and pick somebody up and you don't want to trust Burrow, I'd say go ahead and draft the running back and then see if you can get another starting quarterback in a different way.
Yeah, I just don't know if I see Joe Burrow being a stud quarterback for fantasy purposes. He's got nice weapons around him. If A.J. Green decides to stay healthy for once in the last 3 or 4 years, and Tyler Boyd really stepped up, but he's had some injury issues as well. Let's move on to Joe Mixon, because, listen, this guy's got a lot of hype. He's got a lot of talent. He's in a dynasty league. He's typically about the number 6, 7 running back off the board, but there have been a little bit of issues as far as him possibly holding out here in the future if he doesn't get a new contract. But let's cast that aside and just talk about his fantasy production and what we could maybe expect from him, Tommy, because last year, he was an RB1 the second half of the season, averaging about 16 points a game in PPR leagues. Do you see that? Do you see that staying the same, or do you see an increase there? I mean, what's your thoughts on Joe Mixon?
I can see Mixon being better this season. They've improved their offensive line. Jonah Williams, their first round pick from last year, is healthy. He'll be playing this year. They picked up Xavier Su'a-Filo from the Cowboys also. He'll be plugged in there at guard. I think because of their improved offensive line, I think it only helps him. I'd probably be close to 1,250, 1,300 yards for him, and probably right around that 5th or 6th overall running back.
Yeah, Rob, what's your thoughts on that? I mean, do you see him catching a lot of little check down passes from Burrow, or do you think Burrow's just going to heave it down the field? I mean, what's your expectations as far as Joe Mixon?
I think we need to calm down on Burrow heaving it down the field first. But he doesn't quite have the arm strength like your Andy Dalton does. But, oh well. So Joe Mixon, I think you were spot on with the numbers, Tommy. He's going to be up there, probably number 5, number 6 running back on the season, honestly. With the line upgrade and everything, you may see him creep a little more now, because with having blockers, you're going to inherently get more yards, and they're going to trust the run a lot more. And if Joe Burrow, for whatever reason, does need some check down help, then Joe Mixon's going to be the guy for sure. So I'd see him, honestly, like I could see Joe Mixon probably catching 60 to 70 balls this year with Burrow getting used to the offense.
Hey, listen, that sounds good for any Joe Mixon owner out there, especially if you're in a PPR league. He started off a little slow last year, but definitely picked up the pace the last half of the season. And we'll see if that carries over into this season. And personally, I fully expect it to. He's very important to his team, and they're going to want to get that running game established, and with the additions, to their offensive line, I absolutely see bigger numbers from him moving forward. Tommy, listen, man, the wide receiver situation in Cincy is just wild. Okay, AJ Green has been hurt the last couple of seasons, and even before that, he had a lot of bumps and bruises. Is his heart still in it? Is he? Do you expect him to be healthy this year? And if you do or don't, what's your expectations as far as AJ goes?
I'll put it this way: I never expect AJ Green to be healthy. I have zero trust in him being on the field. Whenever he is on the field, he has great talent. I've never been comfortable having him on my fantasy football team just because it's not really consistent talent. There's a lot of times in big games, in big weeks, where he kind of disappears. And
yeah, he seems to be banged up towards the end of the season, and that's playoff time in fantasy football.
Absolutely.
And not to upset myself, but I do remember losing a championship game to you several years ago because AJ Green didn't score a single point in week 17, and that lost me a championship to your ass. So screw AJ Green. I don't have any trust in him. I will never own him on a fantasy team again. Rob, what's your thoughts on AJ?
I'm kind of with you on the AJ Green side that I don't know if his heart's in it. We talked about that, and his feet hurting all the time. I know the guy wants to play. Like, he just loves football, but at what point do you say, I've had enough? Like, I'm just tired of being hurt.
Well,
and
he's not young. He's 31 years old now.
Right.
So he's
we talked about the injury thing before. I know you and I conversed about it, and it's, to me, I kind of feel like if I were him, I'd want to be done. And you're getting all these opportunities, and Cincinnati keeps giving you the opportunities, but you can't deliver. At some point, you have to self-accept how you're going to be.
Yeah, he used to be a stud. I mean, he used to put up points. I mean, when he's on the field, he produces. But it's just so hard. It's those games that he gets hurt. You've got him in your starting lineup. He gets hurt in the first quarter. Man, you've got 1 or 2 points out of him for the whole day, and that just lost you a fantasy matchup. And that's what kills me about AJ. Just that reliability.
I think he's got a little pressure off of him now too, with the wide receiver room that Cincinnati's built between Tyler Boyd and T. Higgins, and John Ross is going to be healthy, so he get their burner to go back down the field. I think John Ross is great. He just kind of needs to wrap his brain around the game.
Hey, and I think John Ross is probably going to be a little bit more motivated this year because they declined his 5th-year option, and so he's essentially playing for a contract. You might be able to see – we might see some surprising production out of him this year. But, yeah, speaking about those other wide receivers on the team, listen, when Tyler Boyd had to step up, he did step up, and he produced high-end wide receiver 2 numbers. Tommy, do you see that continuing for Tyler Boyd this year, even if A.J. Green plays? I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
I do. I just think that that's who he is. He's a wide receiver 2. You've seen it the last couple seasons with him. Those are going to be the numbers that he's going to put up. That's just him. Going back to college, that was him. That's what he did. He was consistent. He did the same thing year in, year out. He finally started putting it together in the NFL 2 years ago. I just think that that's who he is. I don't see any real change in his role at all.
Well, do you think that T. Higgins will kind of slice into that production? Because I think all three of us really, really, really love T. Higgins. I wanted to see him in Baltimore so bad, but that wasn't the case. Him being that big target, that end zone type of target. Can you see that affecting Tyler Boyd? Because in my opinion, I think you can pretty much just drop Auden Tate now. And John Ross probably has more value in like a best ball league. But what's your thoughts on T. Higgins, Tommy?
I think you kind of hit the nail on the head right there, saying you kind of cut bait with Auden Tate. I think that's where T. Higgins' production is going to come from. I don't think it's really going to cut into into Tyler Boyd's very much at all. Matter of fact, Higgins may even take over some of John Ross's productivity because John Ross isn't on the field very much either.
Yeah, that's true. And that the team really doesn't have, I don't know, that threatening tight end to really get those end zone targets. And I'm wondering if that's one of the reasons behind them drafting T. Higgins is to have that end zone target. What's your thoughts on that, Rob?
Yeah, I'm with you with the tight end thing. I think you're looking at CJ Uzoma and who's the rookie they got last year? What's that guy's name? I'm drawing a blank on it. But
what was that rookie?
Drew Sample. Drew Sample's the guy.
Drew Sample, yeah.
I think Drew Sample, we kind of looked it up before, and Drew Sample on the Our Lives website for depth charts is listed as their number one tight end. And I think you're going to see Uzoma on the field. You'll probably see a lot of 2 tight end sets, and them trying to stretch the field out with John Ross if he's healthy. Other than that, I don't know what to expect from the tight end production-wise in Cincinnati. I just don't know. Drew Sample can catch the ball, but CJ Uzoma's proven he can as well, but I've seen him drop the ball a lot. And
I don't know if we really want to spend any time talking about the tight end situation there in Cincinnati because, in my opinion, I don't know if anyone there is going to be fantasy relevant unless, Tommy, if there's someone, do you think Sample's going to be someone to maybe pick up down the road, or is Uzoma the guy to have?
Well, I'm going to say it like this. You're going to end up facing somebody who has a terrible record at the end of the season whenever you have to win a game, who's going to have one of these guys on their team, and they're going to burn you for 3 scores.
Yeah, I think I've heard that before. So, Tommy, is there anybody in the draft that the Bengals took that sticks out in your mind? Because nothing really, in my opinion, that sticks out because most of the people they took were defensive players. T. Higgins being and Burrow being really the 2 offensive players. Does anyone else in the draft stick out to you at all?
No, not really. Unless you're playing in an IDP league, and even though these linebackers that they drafted are probably going to be backups anyways, Logan Wilson may have the ability to slide in there. But again, unless you play in an IDP league, there's no point in them.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I don't know, Rob, if you've got anything to add there, but it seems that we all agree on the fact that none of us trust AJ Green. In my opinion, if you can trade this guy and get whatever in the hell you can get for him, I would take it. Just to move on from him because I'm certainly never ever going to get burned by him again.
Right. So that's interesting. You mentioned trading him away, and I think you could probably throw him in if somebody's like, hey, can I get a 2nd round pick along with this draft or along with this trade we're trying to do? And you're like, well, I won't give you a second, but I'll throw AJ Green in there.
Absolutely.
To go get your guy. Like if there's somebody you're trying to reach out and get and make this trade happen, maybe just toss AJ Green in there as a little icing on the cake and hope someone bites it.
Yeah, you might have to do a little bit of a selling job on that, but there's always those guys in your league that live in the past, and they can look at AJ Green and think that he can be what he was once again, and that's the guy you need to target and go try to get you a draft pick or get you something on your team that's going to help you down the road. So
and that could be the win now guy. Like who needs that one player to really solidify them going into the playoffs? Or usually, like, you know what, your team is really good, but you're not quite there. Hey, bud, I'll trade you AJ Green for the 2nd or 3rd round pick or some younger player just to talk him into taking him into the playoffs with AJ Green.
Yeah, you can target that guy that's in a position to win now, that championship contender this year. So, yeah, we all agree on that. So, well, with all that being said, that is today's episode of the PPR podcast. I appreciate everyone who gave us a listen. We got a lot of great info when it came to the Steelers, the Bengals, the Browns, the Ravens. I know I had a lot of questions about the Browns and the Bengals myself, and that answered a lot of them for me. So if I had some of those questions, I feel like some other folks out there, was curious about Burrow and was curious what to expect from like a Nick Chubb or a Baker Mayfield. So I want to thank you, Rob. I want everyone to go out and follow you at Back Row Steelers. You have a fantastic podcast. I love it. Even though I'm a Ravens fan, I am a football fan first, and I love it. So everyone go give him a follow at Back Row Steelers, and everyone follow Matt Bruning at Back Row Browns as well. He had some great info when it came to the Browns. And we really appreciate him joining the show as well. So, for everyone here, for me, for Tommy, for Rob, for Joe, for Matt, we appreciate you listening to this edition of the PPR podcast. We hope to see you on the show next time. Until then, everyone, please stay safe.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that podcast, a little broadcast on the AFC North and discussing all things kind of post-draft and how we feel about it. And our opinions we don't take lightly, and we're very serious about everything. So, again, appreciate you listening. Hope you take a little bit of those things to heart and do some research for yourself. But with that being said, that's going to be the end of the pod. Please feel free to jump on Twitter and give me a follow. It's at Back Row Steelers. Find me on Apple, Podbean, Stitcher, Google, like all the podcast platforms. I'm out there. We're on it. Go ahead and subscribe, rate, review, give me some stars, give me some positive or negative feedback. I'd prefer to be a little constructive criticism if you guys can. So anyway, I'm having fun with this, and I hope you guys are too. I hope everyone's enjoying listening to the podcast. So again, I'm Rob, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks for listening. See you next time on the Back Row Steelers Show.